We are not asking for peace. We are demanding it, the human representative, a frail man with sharp eyes, said. Demanding, Valga repeated, leaning back in his chair. His voice dripped with scorn. These humans think they can demand anything from us? Truly, their ignorance knows no bounds. The chamber erupted in agreement. Across the table, high-ranking officers, strategists, and political leaders muttered derisive comments. Humanity, a species whose soldiers were often described as small and weak compared to the towering giants of the Garvok, was no more than an afterthought in the Empire's expansion plans. To Valgar, their attempts at negotiation were amusing at best, pathetic at worst. Their armies are a joke, an advisor scoffed, his eyes flicking over data files, showing the comparative size and firepower of Earth's forces. They call themselves soldiers, but their tallest men barely reach our chests. Their technology is primitive. Their tactics are laughable. They have nothing to offer us. Valgar turned to the council with an almost bored expression. Then it settled. The invasion begins at dawn. We'll send a few of our lesser fleets. It's not worth wasting our finest ships on such vermin. As the council adjourned, Valgar caught a final glimpse of Earth through the chamber window, far below in the orbit of his command ship. It was nothing more than a speck in the void, like so many other worlds they had conquered. This time would be no different. Far beneath the warships that loomed above the planet, General Alexander Trent studied the holographic map of Earth's surface with quiet intensity. His steel-gray eyes scanned the display, taking in the distribution of Garvok forces and their predicted invasion routes. He was a man of few words, but his silence spoke volumes. He'd spent the better part of his life preparing for this moment, and now that it had come, he knew the odds were not in their favor. The Garvok were colossal, technologically superior and overconfident, and that was exactly where their weakness lay. Sir, initial reports indicate the Garvok fleets are positioning for an attack from the north, just as we anticipated, said Captain Harlan, one of Trent's most trusted officers. Harlan's voice was steady, but there was tension in the room. No one could deny the Garvok's advantage. Trent nodded, never once looking up from the map. Good. Let them come. They think we're weak. We'll show them just how wrong they are. There was no bravado in his words, no false optimism. Trent's calm demeanor set the tone for the entire war room. His soldiers weren't the tallest or strongest, but what they lacked in physicality, they more than made up for in discipline, ingenuity, and tactical brilliance. Trent's strategy was built on precision and timing, two things the Garvok would never expect from a species they had dismissed as primitive. Their arrogance will be their downfall, Trent continued, eyes narrowing. We don't need to match them in size or strength. We just need to be smarter. A few of the younger officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen the data. The Garvok were terrifying, but Trent had an unshakable reputation. He had outsmarted every opponent humanity had faced thus far, and if anyone could turn the tide of an impossible battle, it was him. The first strike came as expected, a massive Garvok assault on a small northern city. Their war machines, towering walkers, and low-flying fighters blazed across the sky like a storm of metal and fire. But the humans did not panic. As the invaders descended, Earth's defenses activated with perfect synchronization. Hidden artillery emplacements launched devastating precision strikes, taking out Garvok dropships before they could even deploy their troops. Trent had anticipated every move. His forces were already in position, using the terrain to their advantage. While the Garvok stomped through open fields, trampling anything in their path, the human soldiers moved like ghosts, using cloaked drones and advanced targeting systems to strike from the shadows. By the time the Garvok realized the extent of their miscalculation, it was too late. From his command center, Valgar watched the battle unfold. His sneer began to falter. Reports of heavy casualties streamed in, faster than he had expected. He stared in disbelief at the tactical feeds, showing human forces, a species he had mocked mere hours ago, outmaneuvering and outgunning his soldiers with ruthless efficiency. How? How is this possible? Valgar growled. They're just humans. one of his lieutenants stammered, equally stunned. They shouldn't be able to. Valgar slammed his fist down. We underestimated them. Prepare reinforcements. This is far from over. The sun had barely risen when the second wave of Garvok forces stormed the battlefield. Their assault was relentless, driven by the humiliation of their initial failure. Towers of metal and flesh descended on the once peaceful northern plains, casting long shadows over the human cities and outposts. Valgar, seething from the miscalculation, had sent reinforcements far stronger and more numerous than the first wave. His pride demanded vengeance. In the command center, General Alexander Trent studied the updated data feeds with calm precision. The battle was just beginning, but he could already see cracks in the Garvok's overbearing force. Status report, Trent said, eyes fixed on the holographic display of the battlefield. Captain Harlan, standing at attention, relayed the latest updates. Enemy reinforcements have landed, sir. Ground forces are pushing toward our forward positions. The Garvok are deploying heavy walkers and artillery. They're not holding back this time. Good, Trent replied, his voice unervingly steady. They're finally taking us seriously. Deploy units to sectors 5 through 7 and engage at a distance. Maintain hit-and-run tactics. Harlan hesitated. Sir, with this many Garvok troops, it'll be harder to use guerrilla warfare effectively. We'll need to hold ground at some point. Trent turned to him, his expression revealing nothing. We won't need to hold the ground. We need to make them bleed. The calm certainty in his tone reassured the room. Every move Trent made was deliberate, calculated. He didn't need overwhelming force. He needed the Garvok to exhaust themselves, to overcommit. Meanwhile, on the front lines, human soldiers moved with deadly precision. Clad in state-of-the-art combat armor, they blended into the terrain, striking from concealed positions and vanishing before the Garvok could retaliate. Drone swarms buzzed overhead, providing real-time data to ground troops while intercepting enemy communication lines. Every corner of the battlefield was being watched. Every Garvok mistake was ruthlessly exploited. Sergeant Ethan Cole crouched in the underbrush, his rifle aimed at the massive form of a Garvok walker in the distance. The hulking machine lumbered forward, its four legs crushing the earth beneath it. A high-pitched whine signaled the charging of its energy cannon, aimed at the human artillery bunker a few miles away. Cole's calm crackled to life. Command to Bravo Squad. Do you have eyes on the target? Affirmative, Cole replied, his voice tense but controlled. Lining up the shot now. The seconds dragged as he held his breath, his fingers tightening on the trigger. The walker's cannon hummed louder, preparing to fire. Cole didn't wait for it to unleash its fury. His shot was clean, precise, a single round detonating the power core within the machine's leg. In an instant, the walker staggered, its energy blast firing wildly into the sky as it collapsed. Target down, Cole confirmed as the debris of the massive war machine crashed to the ground. Bravo Squad moved swiftly, repositioning before the Garvok could locate their position. Nearby, other squads were achieving similar victories. In isolated groups, the Garvok's superiority meant nothing. Human strategy was winning the day, even as the Garvok forces continued to swell. Inside the command ship, hovering high above the battlefield, Valgar stared at the tactical map in disbelief. This should have been an overwhelming victory. His forces should have crushed the human resistance by now, but instead, they were being cut down in droves by soldiers half their size. Valgar slammed his fists against the console, the frustration boiling over. How are they doing this? He growled. They are outnumbered, outgunned, yet they strike, as if they know our every move. A nearby advisor nervously cleared his throat. Sir, they're using advanced guerrilla tactics. Their drones are feeding them constant updates on our movements. Every time we engage, they hit us where we're weakest. Valgar turned, his eyes burning with fury. Then cripple their drones, jam their systems, break their lines of communication. We've tried, sir, the advisor stammered. They've adapted faster than we anticipated. Valgor snarled. He had never been so humiliated. His entire career had been built on victories, conquest, and dominance. The Garvok didn't lose, especially not to a species as pitiful as humanity. Yet here they were, bleeding under the constant barrage of human ingenuity. "They're toying with us," Valgor muttered to himself, though loud enough for the entire room to hear. "They think they can outlast us." His thoughts were interrupted by a new report. The humans had deployed a new force, the Legion, on the battlefield. The air grew electric as towering human soldiers, encased in exosuits, stepped forward. These were not ordinary troops. The Legion was humanity's elite force, equipped with enhanced armor that gave them speed and strength rivaling even the Garvok warriors. The sight of them on the battlefield sent a ripple of fear through the alien ranks. Sergeant Cole watched in awe as one of the Legion soldiers, moving with impossible speed, closed the distance between himself and a Garvok combatant. With a single fluid motion, the soldier tore the alien's weapon from its grasp and struck, the enhanced armor amplifying his strength to devastating effect. The Garvok fell to the ground, defeated by a dwarf in human form. The introduction of the Legion changed the battle's dynamic. Suddenly, the humans were no longer only relying on hit-and-run tactics. Now, they could hold their ground. Now, they could fight toe-to-toe with the Garvok. Within hours, the battlefield became a graveyard of Garvok war machines and bodies. Valgor's forces, thrown into chaos by the sudden appearance of the Legion, faltered. The arrogance that had once fueled their confidence was crumbling. In the command center, General Trent watched the unfolding chaos with a quiet satisfaction. His soldiers had done their part, and now the Legion was delivering the final blow. "Send the signal," Trent ordered. "Begin Phase 2. The battlefield was strewn with the wreckage of Garvok war machines. Scorched earth and shattered armor littered the once green plains, marking the brutal collapse of what had once been an unstoppable alien force. From his command ship high above, Commander Valgor watched in silent fury as his once mighty army disintegrated before his eyes. His pride, his legacy, lay in ruins. "How did this happen?" Valgor muttered, his voice strained and guttural. He paced back and forth in the dimly lit war room, each step heavier with the weight of failure. Every data feed, every status report told the same story. His forces were losing, and losing badly. The holographic display in front of him blinked with casualty numbers rising by the second. His sub-commanders, once so full of confidence, stood in uneasy silence, glancing at each other but saying nothing. There was nothing to say. They were being outmaneuvered, outthought, and outfought by a species they had considered beneath them. Mere dwarfs. "Sir," one of his officers finally spoke, his voice trembling. "The human forces, they've surrounded our last remaining strongholds. We've lost control of 3 more sectors. Their Legion, those soldiers in the exosuits, are cutting through our ranks like we're nothing. We must consider a tactical retreat." Valgor rounded on him, his eyes burning with rage. "Retreat? You dare speak of retreat?" He slammed his fist onto the console, the sound reverberating through the room. "The Garvok do not retreat. We do not beg for our lives like cowards." The officer flinched but stood his ground. "Commander, if we don't pull back, there won't be anything left to retreat with. The humans have crippled our supply lines, destroyed our artillery positions, and..." He hesitated, but then forced the words out. "They've made us weak." Valgor's fist tightened until his knuckles were white. It was unthinkable. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Garvok were the conquerors, the dominant force in the galaxy. They had crushed dozens of worlds beneath their heel. But now, they were the ones being crushed. And by whom? By humans. On the ground, General Alexander Trent surveyed the battlefield from a forward command post. His soldiers moved like a well-oiled machine, advancing methodically as they encircled the last Garvok strongholds. The tide had turned decisively in humanity's favor, but Trent remained stoic, never allowing even a glimmer of arrogance to creep into his strategy. Status on the northern front: Trent asked, his eyes scanning the tactical display before him. Captain Harlan, standing beside him, tapped a few commands into the console. All Garvok resistance has been neutralized in sectors 4 through 7. Their forces are retreating to the central stronghold. What's left of them, anyway? Trent nodded. Good. Continue advancing, but maintain discipline. The Garvok are desperate, and desperate enemies are the most dangerous. Don't let them surprise you. Yes, sir. Trent stepped away from the console and stared out at the horizon, where the faint outlines of Garvok fortifications could be seen in the distance. Their arrogance had been their downfall. From the moment they had landed on Earth, mocking humanity and its soldiers, they had sealed their fate. They had underestimated the resolve of mankind, its willingness to fight, to adapt, to endure. He thought back to the beginning of the invasion, to the Garvok's sneering broadcasts, calling humans dwarfs and dismissing their capabilities. Now, those same alien soldiers were being crushed beneath the boots of men they had once looked down upon. It was a satisfying irony, but Trent didn't indulge in the emotion. There was still work to be done. Inside the last Garvok stronghold, chaos reigned. The alien soldiers, once so disciplined and formidable, were panicking. Their communications were in shambles, their commanders dead or retreating. Outside the walls, they could hear the rumble of human artillery and the eerie silence that followed, a silence that meant the Legion was coming. One Garvok lieutenant, his green skin slick with sweat, stumbled through the halls of the command center. His heart pounded in his chest, each step weighed down by the grim realization of their impending doom. They had no hope left. The humans were relentless, precise, and terrifying. For every Garvok soldier that fell, it seemed 100 more humans surged forward to take their place. Reaching the command room, the lieutenant burst through the door, his voice shaking. Commander Valger, we have to surrender. There's no other option. The humans, they're unstoppable. Valger, standing by the massive observation window, turned slowly. His face was a mask of cold fury. You want us to beg? You want us to grovel at the feet of these dwarfs? I'd sooner die. The lieutenant swallowed hard. Commander, if we don't surrender, we'll all die. Valger's eyes darkened, his pride warring with the bitter truth. He could feel the weight of the moment, the crushing realization that everything he had believed, everything he had built, was falling apart. His legacy would not be one of conquest, but of failure. And yet, the thought of surrendering to these humans was more than he could bear. Outside, the sound of explosions grew louder. The humans were breaking through the final defenses. Valger turned back to the window, staring down at the battlefield. His forces were scattered, their strength broken. The humans were advancing, their flags soon to be raised over the shattered remnants of his command center. Sir, the lieutenant whispered, his voice barely audible. We have to surrender. For a long moment, Valger said nothing. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached for the comms panel. His hands trembled, but not from fear. It was rage, humiliation. But deep inside, he knew it was over. All units. Valger's voice crackled over the Garvok communications network, though it was thick with reluctance. Cease fire. We surrender. The words tasted like poison, but they had to be spoken. His arrogance had led them to this moment, and now there was no turning back. On the battlefield, the Garvok soldiers dropped their weapons, kneeling in surrender as human forces closed in. The battle was over. The war was won. And humanity had proven once again that it was not to be underestimated. The Garvok stronghold had fallen. Smoke rose from the ruins, and human soldiers moved through the wreckage with disciplined efficiency, securing the final pockets of resistance. At the center of the devastation, Commander Valger knelt in the dirt, his once imposing frame now slumped in defeat. His golden eyes, which had once gleamed with arrogance, were now dull with fear and shame. General Alexander Trent stood before him, his face expressionless, a silent testament to humanity's strength. Behind him, The Legion stood guard, their exocets gleaming in the sunlight. The contrast between the towering, broken alien and the smaller human was unmistakable. Power had shifted. "Mercy," Valgor rasped, the words choking in his throat. "Spare us. We beg of you." Trent's eyes were cold. For a long moment he said nothing. Then with quiet authority he spoke. "You thought us weak, Commander, but you have learned the truth. We are far from weak." Valgor lowered his head, his pride shattered beyond repair. Humanity had risen from the ashes of arrogance, and now the once mighty Garvok begged for their survival. The war was over. Humanity had won, and the galaxy would never forget.